I want to give you guys 3 head coaches or coaches in general that I think the Raptors need to avoid this offseason if they want to get the most out of their team going forward. Hot commodity right now for a lot of people is newly unemployed Mike Budenholzer. And if you saw a video on my main channel today, Amateur Sports, you saw my video about Mike Budenholzer. I'm not a fan of Mike Budenholzer as a coach, so he is the first of my 3 that I would avoid completely. So Budenholzer, the biggest thing for me on Bud is the lack of adjustments. And we've been talking about it on this stream already, but the lack of adjustments in that Miami series in particular. It's not just the Miami series, but the Miami series in particular. Jimmy Butler torched that team. Every game, Jimmy Butler torched that team. But never did they deviate away from Drew Holiday defending him, single coverage. Never did they get out of the drop coverage from Brook Lopez, bring more players up on him so he wouldn't have those lanes to work with. It's just Mike Budenholzer has consistently been the coach that, he's a good coach. He's a good coach. He won Coach of the Year of the Atlanta Hawks. He is a 4-time champion as an assistant with the San Antonio Spurs. He worked with Popovich for like 16 years. He won an NBA championship with the Milwaukee Bucks. He's a good coach. But where he falters is making those adjustments. And those adjustments are the most fundamental pieces of a championship team and playoff success. And for the Bucks, the year they won the championship, again, I don't want to discredit a championship, but I feel as though Mike Budenholzer was not the coach that got that team to their ceiling. They didn't need to be at their ceiling to win that championship in 2021, but I think the realization this season was that Mike Budenholzer was not the right coach to get that team to their ceiling in terms of playoff success. And I know that we don't have, the Raptors going towards that playoff success right now. We're just kind of worried about development, but I think there are better coaching candidates out there. I spoke about already in Jerry Stackhouse, Patrick Mutombo, who can work more as a developmental coach than Mike Budenholzer, who I would rather go with than him. But beyond like this season with Jimmy Butler not changing those defensive schemes to work on that, more on the stubbornness as a coach, like I talked about in the video today, but the 2015 conference finals, the Cleveland Cavaliers blew the doors off the Atlanta Hawks. I know that's like prime LeBron and whatever, but the Cleveland Cavaliers were essentially dared to shoot threes that entire series. They made them at an extraordinarily efficient clip that entire series, and at no point did Budenholzer adjust to that. At no point did Budenholzer say, hey, this scheme, it made sense, but now it's not working. Let's change it up. It's just the constant, he has it in his head, what he thinks his team should do, and that is it. They're going to lose like that. They're going to win like that, but they are going to win or lose. They're going to live and die by those defensive schemes. So the lack of adjustments is certainly concerning to me from a coaching standpoint. So, I respect Budenholzer, everything he's accomplished. I'm being bullied here by Phoenix about his coaching tree. It's impressive, but I don't think he's the right guy to coach this Toronto Raptors team. He is a candidate that I think that the Toronto Raptors should avoid. Second candidate that I think the Toronto Raptors should avoid is Steve Nash. I have seen quite a bit, not a ton, but a good amount of support in my comment sections for Steve Nash being the next Raptors head coach, and I just so desperately want to avoid him. He was thrown into that head coaching job with the Brooklyn Nets too early, for sure. Got thrown into that job a little bit too early, and I will concede, I don't think anybody could have had success, really, with that disaster of an organization at the time with Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving. Now, I know Jack Vaughn stepped in and did a great job with those guys, but Steve Nash, there was nothing about his time with the Brooklyn Nets that makes me think, hey, this guy is ready to be a head coach. This guy, like, there's certain things that work. It just, you didn't have the team to work with. Yeah, the team wasn't the best to work with, obviously, but I don't think he also got the most out of that team from a coaching standpoint. It just feels like somebody who was really thrown into the fire there, who wasn't ready for it, and it was just a disaster situation as a whole. I'd love to see Steve Nash with a little bit more coaching experience before he steps up. Didn't have a ton of experience with the Golden State Warriors before being thrown into that role. It was basically Kevin Durant kind of handpicked the guy that he wanted to work with from his time with Golden State. That makes sense, but Steve Nash is... It's just not the right time for Steve Nash to take this job. It's a bit of a risk for the Raptors, and there is just so many better candidates out there, like Stackhouse, like Adrian Griffin, like Becky Hammond, Kenny Atkinson, Sam Cassell, Kevin Young. Who else have I said? Patrick Mutombo. Who else have I left out? Chris Quinn, Charles Lee. A lot of other candidates that I would rather go with than Steve Nash. I think this is kind of a case where Raptors fans, like whenever there's like a Canadian player up for grabs, like people like it. I mean, it's fun. You know, you have a Canadian player, you root for a Canadian player on a Canadian team. It's fun to do that. Delano Benton is a fan favorite here. He's local to the area. So even when maybe he's struggling as a player, I think it's more overlooked because he's Canadian. You know what? That's fine. That's fine for people to do. But I think because Steve Nash is Canadian, people are kind of overlooking the deficiencies that we saw from him as a coach with the Nets. Now, I don't think he'll never be a successful NBA head coach. He's a two-time NBA MVP. He's a complete tactician on the court. He helped reinvent basketball with Mike D'Antoni. And the reason Mike D'Antoni could reinvent basketball with that 7 seconds or less offense with the Suns is because he had Steve Nash, who was so extraordinarily smart in running an offense and running it at such a speed. So he's a great tactician, but as far as managing a group of NBA players and getting the most out of them, I firmly believe that Steve Nash is not the right man to take this job right now. And I firmly believe it would be a risk to take him over some of the other great candidates that have been available or that are going to be available for this Raptors team for this summer. The third candidate that I think the Raptors should completely avoid, I got to be honest, guys, for the sake of the video, there were two guys that were being thrown out there as candidates the Raptors could go for in Budenholzer and Steve Nash that I don't agree with. The third one here, I kind of wanted to make it sound a little bit more snappy by throwing in the third one. The third one, nobody wants him, and there's very good reason why. He just got fired by the Houston Rockets, and that is Steven Silas. I mean, Silas, I get it. He had a horrible group of players to work with, but there's just been no growth at all with that Houston Rockets team in his entire tenure as head coach. He's been there, like 2 years at this point, and it's just been two basement dumpster fire seasons that they've gotten very little out of. And I get that he doesn't have a lot to work with, but we've seen no progression from KPJ. We've seen very limited progression from Jalen Green. And these guys, they don't know how to play basketball. He doesn't get anything out of them. He doesn't make the team better by utilizing them to their strengths and just stopping all of the unnecessary shots those guys take. And I think one of the main players, like I'm a huge fan of Alperen Şengün, and this the distinct and utter lack of utilization of Şengün, despite everybody seeing how talented he is, that you run your offense through him in the high post and you can get a lot more success in the low post as well at times, and it just never really deviates that. Just doesn't seem to have the right read for the game. Steven Silas, oh my goodness. Full credit to him for working up, to be like his late father and get himself a head coaching spot. And he was open about that in his press conferences, about being happy to be in that position, given that opportunity. But I don't know if he ever gets another crack at it. I don't know if he ever gets another opportunity to be a head coach because it was just such a disaster situation this year. And I get the team sucked, but he also sucked as a head coach. So Mike Budenholzer, Steve Nash in particular, are guys that people have been talking about. But to me, these are people that I would firmly stay away from. And I think there are much better coaching candidates out there for the Raptors to consider. But what do you guys think?